These are the presidents of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Note, an interesting more complete biographical sketch for each president through to Robert H. Pierson is found in a small book published by Southern Publishing, 1974, written by Ochs and titled The Past and the Presidents. There are also complete biographies written on several presidents, such as White, Andrews, Butler, Daniels, Spicer, and Pierson. Here is a very brief summary of a line of very special men whom God has been able to use for a very unique and often difficult assignment. Number 1. John Byington, May 20, 1863 to May 1965. Before the third angel's message came to John Byington's attention, he was prominent in the Methodist Church and later became a Wesleyan minister. It was not an easy matter for him to accept the Sabbath, but he chose to obey the plain "Thus saith the Lord." His farm provided a station for the Underground Railroad, giving food and shelter to escaping slaves. He was a tall, dignified man of few words but definite and well chosen. He was often called Father Byington because he was the oldest among the Adventist leaders at the time. He became president at the age of 71. His main focus as president was to urge harmony and unity among believers. Born in 1798, he died just past the age of 88 and had chosen for his funeral the text found in Revelation 3:21, "To him that overcometh." Number 2. James White, May 1865 to May 1867. The second president of the General Conference was one of the most tireless workers of the movement. Born in 1821, he traced his heritage to the Pilgrims of the Mayflower. He began attending school at the age of 16, studied 18 hours a day and completed all the formal education he would have in about 3.5 years. At the age of 21 he accepted Miller's teachings and immediately began preaching, converting more than 1,000 people during a trip that lasted 6 weeks. In addition to being a good leader and a powerful preacher, James also possessed the gift of song. He assembled the first hymnal, wrote the first paper, Present Truth, founded the Review and Herald, started the Youth's Instructor and the Signs of the Times. He organized the doctrines of the church, the structure of the denomination, and helped establish a number of institutions. He died in 1881, 2 days after turning 60 years old. Number 3. John N. Andrews, May 1867 to May 1869. John Andrews had one of the most brilliant, analytical minds of the movement. At the age of 5, he heard a sermon he remembered the rest of his life. His strength of character is shown by an incident when he was 14 years old. In Maine, an Adventist meeting convened near a stream and bridge. At the close, he and an elderly man started across the bridge but were met by a hostile mob. A man with a whip struck the old man, but John intervened, saying very stoutly, "We are commanded to bear one another's burdens. If you whip Brother Davis, you whip me too." Awkward and confused, the bully admitted it's too bad to whip a boy and let them pass. John mastered Latin, Greek, Hebrew, French, German and Italian. He memorized the New Testament and at the age of 21 joined the publishing committee of the Advent Review. One of his greatest contributions to the church was a 342-page history of the Sabbath. A second great contribution, and the one he is most remembered for, was the fact that he was our first missionary to Europe in 1874. He died of tuberculosis at the age of 54, and his remains are still in his adopted home of Switzerland. Number 4. James White, May 1869 to December 1871. Elder White's second term. Number 5. George Butler, December 1871 to August 1874. When George Butler was but a child, his parents joined the Millwright movement and opened their home as a meeting place for believers. He was the grandson of the governor of the state of Vermont. At the age of 31 he was an earnest young layman, farmer, and elder of the church in Waukon, Iowa. The administration of the Iowa Conference joined a dissident movement, so the constituency licensed him as a minister and then elected him president of the Iowa Conference, 1865. He was the first president to travel overseas while in his post. It was during his term of office that the church made a step forward that would forever leave a major impression on its membership. Education. The first school was founded. During an interim when James White was again president, he returned to the presidency of the Iowa Conference. He was so wrapped up in his work that at the close of his second term, he required a complete rest, but again in 1901 he was asked to be president of the Florida Conference. Then the next year he took the reins of the Southern Union. He continued a heavy schedule of preaching and writing until his death in 1918. He lived to see one of his very first converts, A.G. Daniels, become president of the General Conference. Number 6. James White, August 1874 to October 1880. Elder White's third term, for a total of just over 10 years. Number 7. George Butler, October 1880 to October 1888. Elder Butler's second term, for a total of nearly 11 years. Number 8. Ole A. Olsen, October 1888 to February 1897. At just 5 years of age Ole Olsen immigrated to America with his family from Skogan, Norway, thus he became the first foreign-born president. At the age of 29 he became president of the Wisconsin Conference, then followed the Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa conferences. In 1886 he was invited to go to Scandinavia to oversee the work there. At the age of 43 he was elected president of the General Conference for 9 years, served a year in Africa opening work among new tribal groups, then returned to the European continent, Great Britain, Australia, and finally retired in America, working among immigrants. Considered one of the most loved leaders, he died suddenly while still working, 1915. When the church appointed him as president of the World Church, he was not present but rather working diligently in Norway as president and evangelist of the Norwegian Conference. His diary had an interesting entry, received word from the brethren, as to his appointment. But he didn't leave right away, he was doing God's work where he was. Then one day 5 months later, his diary reads, leaving today for America to take up duties at General Conference. To modest, unassuming Ole A. Olsen, it made no difference whether he was serving the church as a preacher somewhere or president of the World Church. Number 9. George A. Irwin, February 1897 to April 1901. At the age of 17, Irwin joined the 20th Ohio Volunteer Infantry and the Civil War. Fighting 17 battles under Generals Grant and Sherman, he was finally captured near Atlanta, Georgia, and sent to the infamous Andersonville prison. Here, amid all the stench, misery, and death he was converted. He survived prison, was released at the close of the war, went back home to Ohio, where he accepted the message and became a charter member of the Mount Vernon, Ohio SDA Church, now age 44. 4 years after joining the church, he was elected president of the Ohio Conference. He was asked to be part of a committee of 3 and returned south in search of a site for a school, today's Oakwood College, named for 65 huge oak trees they found on the farm. At the General Conference session held at Lincoln, Nebraska in 1897, 38 conferences and 5 mission fields were now represented. Irwin insisted that the ministry should not be tied to business matters, it consumed time that should be spent on the gospel work. Laymen of honest report should be elected to fill the business needs of the church. After he had given 4 years of work at the General Conference, the constituency entered the restructuring session of 1901. Irwin and Daniels exchanged places, with Irwin going to Australia to head the work there. Irwin was always generous with whatever money he had. He helped finance a school in the South, a church in Atlanta, Oakwood College, and numerous students. His philosophy was based on the parable of the pearl of great price, it will take all to buy the field. George Irwin finally rested at the age of 68 in 1913. Number 10. Arthur G. Daniels, April 1901 to May 1922. At the age of 36, Arthur Daniels became the first president of the church's first Union Conference, established in Australia. Then, at age 43, he was elected president of the General Conference and served in that capacity longer than any other we've had, 21 years. He was a most dynamic leader, with a vision of the mission field scarcely dreamed of before. He had spent many years with Ellen White as a mentor developing the work in the South Pacific, using his rich experience and youthful enthusiasm to guide the church through a process of reorganization that spread much more authority and responsibility out to the local fields, enabling them to move much more quickly in the spread of the gospel. Few would have guessed that Daniel started out as a shy lad with a speech impediment. His father, a physician, fought and died in the bloodiest battle of the Civil War, Antietam. His mother remarried a rancher, so Arthur grew up thinking he would become a farmer. At age 16 he thought being a teacher would be better and went to Battle Creek College. After getting married, he found himself in Texas working with evangelist Elder Kilgore as his tent master and with help overcoming his speech problems. James and Ellen White came to Texas that fall and stayed all winter, becoming lifelong friends with Arthur and his wife, Mary. One of Daniel's early converts was Mrs. Flora Plummer, who later became the first Sabbath school secretary of the General Conference, serving 35 years there, and is also well remembered within youth ministry for her early contributions that eventually led to the organizing of the youth ministry department. While in Australia, Daniels was the first evangelist to visit New Zealand in support of the believers who were already meeting there. Daniels wrote 3 books, the last of which was finished as he lay on his deathbed, The Abiding Gift of Prophecy in 1935. Number 11. William A. Spicer, May 1922 to May 1930. Spicer's very first appointment for the church was to go to England and work with S. N. Haskell. He had to leave a newfound sweetheart behind and wait with heavy heart for nearly 2 years before he had earned enough to invite her to come to England to be married. Later a call came to go to India, where he served as editor of the Oriental Watchman, was for a time the only ordained minister in the country, and then back to the U.S. as secretary of the Mission Board. The Battle Creek fires brought on the transfer to Maryland, and the Spicers were the second family to make the move. He had been appointed as General Conference Secretary, age 38, and served in that capacity the entire term of Arthur Daniels' presidency, replacing him when he retired. The records show that Spicer had been overseas every year but 4 from 1900 to 1940. These trips often took several months and is an indication of his commitment to seeing that the work continue the same pace as that set during the years of his predecessor. He passed away in Tacoma Park in 1952, nearly 87 years after his birth in Minnesota. Number 12. Charles H. Watson, May 1930 to May 1936. Watson was the first Aussie to become Australasian Division, SPD, president and then the first Aussie to become General Conference president. Born in Yambuk, Victoria, west of Melbourne, raised his early life in a frugal, tough environment of hard work prepared him for God's future assignment as president during the most difficult economic period of our history. Yet it was a period of progress and successes in spite of the financial chaos in the world. Watson was first able to practice his business acumen by running his father's store. Later he would apply sound financial practice to funds loaned by members to form a pooled resource for the building of institutions and churches. Applying proper business principles in the development of the food industries became another challenge met successfully. While in the area of evangelism, he traveled across the South Pacific Islands, expanding and solidifying the work. During the Depression, the church-employed staff was cut by 50%, but the work was not slowed up. Rather, 90,000 new converts came in during this period, 48 new missions were established, 1,000 new churches were built, and 184 new countries and islands received the message comprising 122 new languages. At the close of his term, the Watsons returned to Australia, where he continued in division leadership until his retirement in 1944. He died the day before Christmas in 1962, age 87. Number 13. J. Lamar McElhany, May 1936 to July 1950. Young Lamar McElhany's first encounter with Mrs. White was while he attended Healdsburg College in California. In response to his question regarding the 144,000, she said, "I would not tell you if I did know." He was surprised, but later understood when he read, "When men are curious to know something, it is not necessary for them to know. God is not leading them, it is not his will that they shall get into controversy over questions which will not help them spiritually, such as, who is to compose the 144,000? McElhany began his 58 years of service to the church as a colporteur. As he came from a very close, tight-knit family, the call to overseas service was difficult to accept and often brought severe loneliness to his soul, but travel he did, first to Australia, then to the Philippines, then to New Zealand and, finally, after several years, back to the U.S., where he served as hospital chaplain, then president of several conferences. He was gifted with a rare blend of kindness and firmness and has been likened to a surgeon who can perform major surgery, yet leave but a very small scar. In 1926 he was elected Vice President for North America, equivalent to President of the North American Division today, and 10 years later was chosen to be President of the General Conference. Later, looking back, with his normal humbleness, he commented that the best position he ever held was in his youth as tent master for a couple of evangelists. After his third term as president ended, he continued as a general field secretary until his death in 1959. Shortly before his death, during a hospital stay, an attendant asked him how he liked being president so many years. His typically honest answer was, "I did not like it, it wore me out." Number 14. William H. Branson, July 1950 to May 1954. Elder Branson's youth was characterized by diligent study and a love for cooking. His desire to work for the church won over becoming a chef, but he always loved to do the cooking for guests who would visit. He was ordained at the age of 23, became president of the South Carolina Conference at the age of 24, of the Cumberland Conference at age 26, of the Southern Union at the age of 28, and of the African Division at the age of 33. Seems times were different then. The entire continent had a magic appeal to him. He often slept on the open ground, used tree bark for dishes, and employed every imaginable form of transport, but covered the continent seeking places and ways to spread the gospel. In a short time he wrote 2 books as motivators to other youth who would choose to work on this great continent. He was long recognized as an able administrator and powerful preacher, so after 10 years of hard, satisfying work in Africa, he was asked to become a vice president of the General Conference, age now 43. He worked hard but also knew how to relax and insisted on never mixing business and relaxation. He loved gardening, had a small boat and was never so relaxed as when he'd go camping, cooking over a campfire and sleeping under the stars. His father-in-law once remarked, "Next to the Lord, Will Branson is the truest and greatest, the kindest and best man that ever lived." From 1938 on he served first in Europe, then in China. When in 1950 he was invited to be the president of the General Conference, his response was, "I have always had very high ideals regarding the type of man who should stand as the leader of God's people. I have never felt that I could personally measure up to that standard. I have no natural abilities, but when all was said and done," he concluded, "I have never felt free to say no when asked to undertake any task." His secretary once wrote to friends, "I have never known anyone more prolific and versatile, and withal a genial disposition." During his presidency, he developed Parkinson's disease and resigned at the 1954 session in San Francisco. In his last sermon to the delegates, his urge was still, "The whole business of the church is to save souls." He died in 1961. Number 15. Reuben R. Figuhr, May 1954 to June 1966. Born in Wisconsin, Figuhr was of that large immigrant movement of Germans who had left Germany in the early to mid-1800s, gone to Russia and then a generation later had to move again to the states of the north-central plains of the U.S. He was fluent in 4 languages including English, German, Tagalog and Spanish. His service included 18 years in the Philippines, 10 of them as President of the Union, another 9 years as President of the South American Division and 4 years as a General Field Secretary of the General Conference. During his presidency, the church reached its first million in membership and saw an additional 500,000 join. When he was elected, the delegates represented 109 countries and several hundred languages. His travels took him to some of the most remote places of the earth, logging 2 million miles by air in addition to countless miles by bus, train, and even using water buffalo for transport. In one instance he had to ford a river more than 50 times to reach his appointment. He was laid to rest to await his Lord's coming in 1983. Number 16. Robert H. Pierson, June 1966 to January 1979. Robert Pierson's style of servant leadership might best be illustrated by an incident that occurred shortly after his retirement from official duties. He was invited to be the guest speaker for a series of deacon and elders meetings followed by ministers' meetings at Camp Alamisco on Lake Martin in Alabama. There were only a few hours on Sunday between the two sets of meetings for the camp crew to clean up and have everything ready for the second group. The camp director had just begun preparing the large meeting hall when Pierson happened by and offered to take over the cleaning, freeing up the director for other urgent work. When the director protested that Pierson was a guest and should take the opportunity to relax a bit and enjoy the beautiful lake, Pierson's response was, "I hear whoever doesn't work doesn't eat, now me tell what needs to be done." He then proceeded to mop, wax, polish and set up the 200 chairs while the rest of the staff worked feverishly on other assignments. While humility was perhaps not unique to the man among presidents, he was indeed a special person practicing what he preached. He was born in Iowa as a fourth-generation Adventist in 1911. His father, though, was a Methodist and bank president. He enjoyed writing, and at the age of 12 had one of his poems published, a 7-stanza story of Lindbergh's flight across the Atlantic. He also loved sports. In high school he was captain of both his football and track team. He also played basketball and baseball and did some boxing. He thought little of studies beyond high school. Then his mother died, and his life took a different turn. He married his high school sweetheart, and both went to Southern Missionary College, where she taught part-time elementary classes and he milked cows to pay their way through school and degrees in theology and education. 8 years after leaving college, now age 30, he was named president of the South India Union. From there he returned to New York, where he maintained a daily radio broadcast, and in 1944 was called to be president of the British West Indies Union. 6 years later he returned to India as division president. While there he became the first SDA minister to enter the mountain kingdom of Sikkim. In 1958 he became president of the Trans-Africa Division and was among those trapped in the middle of the Katanga/Congo War, with shrapnel often flying inches away. He later admitted, by quoting 2 Corinthians 1:10, "It was God who preserved us from imminent death," Phillips. Finally, due to his doctor's advice, he retired from official duties in 1979, but then served as a volunteer pastor in a church back in the Caribbean for some time. While pastoring in Hawaii, Pierson died in 1989 at the age of 78 of that heart attack predicted by his doctor 10 years before. Number 17. Neal C. Wilson, January 1979 to July 1990. The son of missionaries, he spent many years in Africa and India, then added the Middle East, where he was president of the Egypt Mission for 5 years and of the Nile Union for 8. He was active in negotiating the opening of SDA work in Libya, Sudan, and Aden. Eventually he became president of the Columbia Union in the U.S., and from there president of the North American Division by 1966. At the Annual Council of 1978, when Elder Pierson resigned, Elder Wilson was appointed as his replacement, effective January 1979. As president of a world organization now numbering several million and increasing by the millions, Elder Wilson often found himself in interviews and negotiations with heads of state from countries around the world, seeking ways in which the SDA Church could more effectively serve and share its unique ministry. He was instrumental in obtaining formal recognition of the Church in Russia and other countries of the former Soviet Union, participated in the negotiations for the establishment of a theological seminary and publishing house for the newly organized Eurasia Division, and saw through high-level meetings to obtain a degree of religious toleration in many countries where such had been very limited. Upon retirement after 11 years, he continued to hold many key committee functions on a volunteer basis, lending his world political expertise to the Church for yet many years. One of his personal attributes that held him in very high esteem by many church members around the world was his unusual ability to recall acquaintances and details often many years later. He had a prolific memory of chance encounters and small incidents that would often be recalled years later, to the astonishment of those involved. This same ability was also used to good advantage, as he was able to keep a clear view of the ever-growing pulse of the Church in all its myriad details around the world. Number 18. Robert Folkenberg, July 1990 to March 1999. Folkenberg, born in Puerto Rico of missionaries in 1941, was the first president certified to fly multi-engine airplanes and helicopters, a certified scuba diver, ham radio operator, etc. He was an entrepreneurial leader who was able to obtain grants from many governments for health and educational projects in Central America during his years there. He also secured funding for radio stations in several countries in Central America and the Caribbean. Folkenberg brought the Church into the technological age by tying in churches all over the world through satellite TV and the Internet. World evangelism took on a new meaning with worldwide campaigns via satellite, using multiple translations, reaching hundreds of thousands of viewers simultaneously. Number 19. Jan Paulsen, March 1999 to July 2010. The second Norwegian, born in Narvik, 1935, to become president, Paulsen served the Church in his home country, England, and sub-Saharan Africa, and as the longest-serving president of the Trans-European Division. During his term in TED, he was instrumental in strengthening and expanding the work in several countries of Eastern Europe after the fall of communism, including Albania, which had been completely closed to religion until 1990. While his administrative talents have been long recognized by the Church, he prefers to be known as a scholar in the field of theology and missiology. He was the first Adventist to earn a Doctor of Theology degree from the Protestant faculty of any German university, Tübingen University 1972. Over the years he has published numerous papers and a book on his favorite themes. Number 20. Ted N. C. Wilson, July 2010, present. Ted N. C. Wilson, born May 10, 1950, is the current president of the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He has served the Church in a variety of roles throughout his nearly 50 years of ministry. He began as a pastor in the Greater New York Conference in 1974, and quickly moved into administrative and foreign service roles. His administrative experience led the Church in business session to elect him as a General Conference Vice President in 2000, a position he held until 2010 when he was elected President. As President of the General Conference, he has been visiting schools, hospitals, and various church organizations around the world. Wilson, along with fellow officers and church leaders, helped lead the Church through extremely challenging times, especially during the novel coronavirus pandemic that plunged the world into chaos. Many thanks for watching this video till the end. If you like this kind of content, let me know in the comments so I can make more, and don't forget to like this video. Subscribe for more future videos, and may God bless you.